So over the past day, I've been sitting here trying to think if season 2 changes anything, everything, or what it actually does. At least the announcement of it and what they've announced. I'm sure that there's going to be more things coming, but I wanted to just talk about what they actually released already. Because to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if this is everything. As we saw from season 1 announcement, there really wasn't anything additional. We had the hearts released in the game, the new storyline, which they've kind of already alluded to here with the announced trailer, and that was basically it. That was all the new content. They've obviously done quality of life changes and balance patch changes, but that's what they've already alluded to here. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is all we get for season 2. And let's just assume, be a little optimistic here for a second, that it's not just this, okay? But if it is, I don't think this is enough. Now, this launches on October 17th, so we do have a little bit of time until this drops, about 2 months, which is exactly what we expected. Every 3 months, we're going to get a season, and, well, that's the 3-month mark. Now, the first thing that they talk about in this post is the new quest line. For me, the new quest line means absolutely zero. For the vast majority of people, they actually enjoy the new quest line. So this is kind of hard for me to rate because I have gone through the quest line and I didn't even have any interest in finishing it the last couple missions because I was using it to farm. I've gone and seen everything that has to be done in that quest line for season 1, but I didn't find the storyline super interesting because it wasn't really a core storyline. I personally prefer a lot of the, I guess, standard Diablo lore. Like, I've watched all of Diablo 1, Diablo 2, and Diablo 3's cutscenes before Diablo 4 came out, just so I can get a refresher. And the lore is actually quite good, but these like side quests and things like that, or like side storylines, don't really intrigue me all that much. And well, it's good, but just not really something I'm super excited about. Vampiric powers, 5 additional endgame bosses with the ability to target specific, unique, and uber unique. So let's break this down one by one here. First off, the vampiric powers. This immediately shouts hearts to me. Something akin to the hearts. Hopefully something more interesting. I mean, we've seen vampires in a multitude of other games, but honestly, the first thing I think of is like I'm using vampiric powers for those of you that might have played this, but I think of the Dawnguard expansion for Skyrim when we were able to transform into vampire lords and just have these amazing skills. This isn't an ARPG obviously, but that's kind of what I get reminded of, right? Having these like massive drain abilities, AoE abilities, just extremely powerful. So maybe we'll have some sort of transformation, maybe we'll have just standard powers that we equip onto our build. I much think that, well, the second is going to be more likely, where we just have static abilities that you get from like the hearts and such, or something like that. I doubt that they're going to do some sort of transformation, something really cool, but this is what that looks like to me. As for the additional endgame bosses, this is actually quite exciting. Now, 5 endgame bosses is really not that much. You're going to beat them quickly if you are already participating in the endgame fights, and with that being beaten, well, you're going to move on to the next one, unless there's some reason to repeatedly farm these. Now, if that is increased uber unique drop rate or unique drop rate, that could be interesting. However, in order to kind of really suss this one out, you kind of have to go down here. As you can see here, the updates in the above bullet and the ability to target specific unique and ultra unique items as a drop will be available in both seasonal and eternal realms. Now, this is not a bullet point. What you'll see is the bullet points, it doesn't actually include the endgame bosses. So what this means to me is the ability to target farm specific unique and ultra unique items does not specifically pertain to the endgame bosses. Does that mean that the endgame bosses aren't able to be farmed for uniques and uber uniques? No, but what that does mean is that it's not exclusive to it. So this doesn't encourage or give me hope that these are going to be extremely useful and viable to farm. Because again, endgame bosses are great, but if they're one and done, well, you kind of still have the same issue that you do in season 1. But I do really, really like the ability to target farm uniques and uber uniques. If uber uniques are actually acquirable, maybe within, I don't know, 100 hours or so of gameplay, which is a ridiculous amount, and the vast majority of people aren't even going to be able to acquire them. But for those that are more dedicated, actually get or rather rewarded for your grind, seems extremely fun. And these uber uniques aren't even like build defining, they're just really good. Like the Harlequin crest, the one that people want the most, that just has good stats on it. Like, it's not like, oh, you get this insane ability where you have infinite energy so you could build any build you want. It just gives you more ranks up and damage reduction, which is just a good item, right? It's not like it's super exciting in terms of gameplay, it's just a good item. So I hope to see uber uniques actually be acquirable, because at the current moment they are not, and we're talking like on a multi-million player base level. Like, they're just not acquirable for the player base in general. Like, we're talking about 0.00001% of the player base. But then we have a couple of quality of life updates, as they mentioned here. The gem tab, I think this is actually a big update, but it actually doesn't really change much. I'm sure most of us at this point, if you're an endgame player, have kind of managed your gems yourselves. For me, I only pick up 3 gems: rubies, topazes, and emeralds, and I've never had a build really that wants anything else. Or if it did, it wasn't really that big of an upgrade, and I could just acquire it at that point. But if you're playing the rogue, it's basically exclusively emeralds, rubies, and topazes, and it's very common across all builds. So this doesn't really do much for me. At least in terms of actually managing my inventory. I don't save a ton, and perhaps this changes with the new season because we will be using the gems more often due to not having the hearts. So maybe you'll start collecting skulls as well, but we'll see. Paragon points, skill points, potion charges, and opal charges, basically renown transfers overall. This is actually a really nice quality of life change, and one of the big things that people were criticizing of Diablo is that they were kind of doubling down on this idea that you had to interact with the open world and you had to regrind the renown. It's something that a lot of people complain with PoE and kind of turn them off for PoE, which is that you have to complete the campaign before getting to the end game content. Now, I know some PoE players are going to be like, well, that's obviously the point of the game, and you could have the same argument for the renown grind, okay, for Diablo 4. But people just don't enjoy it, and so having it transfer between characters and between seasons in its entirety is actually a big bonus for most people. Not everyone, because for some people, it just removes the reason why they play the game, because some people just grind the renown. That's their fun. So not all good, but I would say more good than bad, at least from a enjoyment of the game perspective for someone who's returning for future seasons. They also are going to change the functionality of vulnerable, overpower, and critical strike damage. This one scares me a little bit because if you watch their streams in the past, they've specifically mentioned vulnerable and critical strike damage as a problem within the game. This is a really, really big issue if they decide to nerf it again. Because one thing with a lot of our builds is it basically exclusively uses vulnerable and critical strike damage. Overpower damage is just too unreliable, and as they explicitly said in their developer live stream, that is the point. The point is not to have this consistent every single time getting value out of it. It's to be able to synergize and time your attacks with the overpower abilities. Vulnerable and critical strike damage, that is the reason why they're so strong, is because you get them all the time. So the only way I could see them adjusting this, if they include vulnerable and critical strike damage, is that they're going to nerf buff overpower and nerf vulnerable and crit strike damage, which could be a little bit, well, worrisome, but we'll see how they do so. The big thing I think out of this bullet point, is the elemental resistance point. One thing that's really core to this game is damage reduction and armor. Basically, everything revolves around these two stats because you cannot participate in endgame content without them. Elemental resistances are basically useless. You can basically ignore them on your jewelry, and if you get ones that are good, great, but it doesn't really change much. Like, you're not going to roll for them, and then just having them on your pieces of gear, well, you don't even notice them oftentimes. It's not like, oh, this one has lightning resistance and this one has fire resistance, I'm going to pick up this lightning resistance even though substats are worse. You just don't even look at them for most people. And this is a problem. And that's mainly because these resistances are so weak and so niche and so specific that they don't really give you that much benefit for your character. So that's going to be a really, really important thing to note. Other than that, well, they mentioned that stashes can be searched. gems no longer take up inventory space in specific. And they also talked a little bit about the new storyline in the trailer down here. So what does all this mean? Is this, something exciting? Is this going to be something that I'm really excited to jump into, etc.? Well, I'll say this. These are all really good improvements, but there's not really much new here, right? They've already talked about the elemental resistances, the gem tab, and the stash being worked on. These are all things that they've mentioned, along with the vulnerable, overpower, and critical strike damage. These are all things that they said they were going to change, and honestly, you could have expected it in a random patch for Season 1. The only thing that I think of that's really new with Season 2 are these things right here. Because again, these things are things that you could have just done for Season 1 as well as a quality of life change. Like if they're doing quality of life changes and making it the seasonal theme, like that is the theme, or that is one of the big selling points of the season, that to me doesn't really scream, okay, we made a good season. It's just we're making the game better, which you should have done beforehand. So in terms of the actual season, well, we get the new endgame bosses and we get the vampiric powers. And without knowing more about the vampiric powers or the endgame bosses, I can't really say too much. But what I will say is these vampiric powers could be easily as unique as something that we could see in a lot of other games that really change your builds, as unique as set items in Diablo 3, where it completely defines your build. You could have so many different options, but their argument for hearts in Season 1 was that they were build defining strong. And what ended up happening was people run the same 2 or 3 on every build because they're just the strongest. And so it's not really build defining. They just use that skill and they just incorporate it into every build. So it's not like you build a build for each of the hearts. It's like you're using the hearts for every class that are good for the classes, which is kind of, I guess you could say, the reverse of what I would have expected. So if they say vampiric powers are build defining, that could be, again, very unique, where we have all sorts of different options, or it could be as, boring as the Season of the Barber, which is what we're kind of in now. As for the additional endgame bosses, well, these can be really interesting and have a really, really good fight pattern like the Uber Lilith. I think Uber Lilith is a really excellent boss fight. But at the same token, we could have really, really uninteractive and mediocre bosses because of the way Uber Lilith is structured, and have it to where they're not really interesting to farm again. So it really depends on how they decide to go with this, and I'm really hoping that they make these worth farming, as well as make these worth going for and actually change up the landscape of the game a little bit. But with that said, let me know what you all think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.